Oh, yes, we are live. Hello, everybody, or whoever has joined us today. I am Ekta Raghuvanshi, South Asia analyst for RANE, and joining me today is Scott Cardis. He is our resident Asia Pacific analyst. Today, we are talking about an interesting topic of export controls. Just to give a brief idea about why and what we saw in the previous months in Southeast Asia and South Asia, particularly countries like Indonesia, India, putting export controls, bans of some kinds or caps of some kinds on important products like wheat, like edible oils, which are very important for smaller countries in the region for their food security, and inflation and all other things related. And these conversations were very important. I know during the when the talk about shortfall of food grains, especially coming out of the impact of the Russia Ukraine war, and all sorts of things. Today, Scott and I would just talk about some of those items, some of the countries that I think could be still relevant, could be relevant in the future when we talk about climate change and things like that. Just to start off a conversation here with you, Scott. Can I ask you about what was the Indonesian edible oil export ban all about? Because countries like India, like Bangladesh in South Asia are extremely dependent on Indonesian edible oil. And because of the export ban, there was a genuine panic in these economies. There was a genuine price rise, which led to high food prices and food inflation, a burden on consumers, stress or pressure on the governments to do something about it. Can you just enlighten us about what happened in Indonesia?
Yeah, so when we talk about edible oils for Indonesia
Mhm.
specifically, we're talking about palm oil. Now, palm oil is found in a lot
Yeah.
of products. It's found in, some delicious, you know, I don't know if we could say the corporate name, but it's like a delicious hazelnut spread that I like to eat, and it's definitely not healthy for me. Um, but it's also used as like cooking oil, similar to how people in America might use butter or avocado oil or olive oil. Huh? Lots
Yeah,
of
it
oils
is
I've been talking about
extremely
today.
important. Yeah, for
Yeah,
food industry, like every street food, I would say every street food in South Asian major economies like India, they use things like palm oil. So edible oil and coming from Indonesia is really important for local
yeah,
economies.
yeah, and it's a huge industry too within Indonesia. It employs a lot of people, and it's a big part of their export economy. And
Hmm.
Indonesia, basically, this is kind of knock-on effects of the Ukraine war. After a lot of sunflower oil exports were disrupted coming out of Ukraine, countries like
Hmm.
Indonesia suddenly found their palm oil in higher demand. And what ended up happening is all the palm oil producers said, "Oh, our international price is so much higher, so we only want to sell to the international market." It makes sense, right? Your own business can find
Yeah.
a lot about or find more profit doing that. But then as a result, the domestic market couldn't uh, afford the higher prices then because in with just basic supply and demand, there is less supply for the domestic market, so the price went up. And a lot of people in Southeast Asia, especially, are living on some of these very thin margins for their budgets. So even though an increase of, let's say, 10 to 50 cents or even a dollar doesn't seem like a lot, this
Hmm.
was pushing a lot of people over the edge of suddenly they couldn't afford the cooking
Yeah.
oil, the palm oil. And so then Indonesia, President Joko Widodo, Jokowi, as he's colloquially called, instituted an export ban. And he says, well,
Mm.
then we're not going to export. We're going to set up our reserves, get more palm oil for our domestic market to
Yeah.
ensure that our domestic consumers can have enough and they can afford this stuff. And this is not the first time Indonesia has done this. If people know Indonesian markets, Indonesia did this with coal earlier in the year in January. They were really worried about their own power generation. So this is not the first time Indonesia's done this.
Hmm.
They also do it with like raw ores, nickel especially is a big one right now. But then what ends up happening is, they don't export to countries like India, like Bangladesh, who
Yeah.
really need this. And there was never, I don't believe there's any intention for Indonesia to purposely harm another
Yeah.
country. It's just they're looking out for their own people, their own needs, and their own necessities. And the thing is, a lot of times when we look at when I was looking into this, palm oil doesn't have a very long shelf life. It's got about 6 months
Mm.
before you got to use it. So unlike other commodities that you can store for years and years, even though they're edible, like the Canadian maple syrup, 3 year reserve that the Canadians have. Yeah, of course. I'm sorry. That's the single most Canadian thing I've ever heard of in my life. But uh, yeah, like they have a supply for 3 years to maintain stable prices. You can't do the same with palm oil. So you have such a short turnaround time. You can't really stockpile very much for very long. And that
Mm.
was that was actually the big drivers because of these high international prices forcing or not forcing, really giving a lot of incentives for producers to export, not to sell to domestic market. You then just have countries saying, nope, we're gonna stop these exports, and we're gonna make sure that we have enough for our people. So
Hmm.
and you mentioned it hit Indonesia or in India and Bangladesh
India.
really hard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How did it hit them there?
Oh, so India, I don't, I'll mess up the numbers, but I think India imports like 56% of the edible oils that it imports 56 of the edible oil requirements. Palm oil makes the biggest chunk of oil. It of course gets sunflower oil, like you said, from Ukraine. It gets soy oil from Argentina and Brazil. But palm oil is a major, even crude or refined both makes a major chunk of Indian requirement, even Bangladesh. What ended up happening is, yes, the prices in the local markets started going up, uh, and things like that. But I think Indonesia like revoked this ban or something after some time. How long was this ban into place?
Off the top of my head, it was between 4 to 6 weeks.
Oh,
Was
okay,
it,
yeah.
it wasn't the longest ban, but it was definitely enough that it caused all the exporters really upset in Indonesia.
It did in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, I started hearing stories about black markets of edible oil. People trying to stockpile because there was so much uncertainty about the timeline of this ban, about when how long this would last. Plus, there was there's this huge a general food uncertainty debate that's been looming in the region just because of the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war. Because Ukraine, Russia have been the biggest wheat exporters in the world. Wheat is one of the major food items, and in absence of that, if there's a shortfall of some other essential food item, I think that just pressurizes the governments. It then brings up all sorts of conversations like what will happen with food insecurity. Will there be protest? Will there be political implications, instability because of this particular reason, plus all the other factors also. As you were talking about Indonesia, and why it essentially banned the edible oil exports, very similar to that was why India banned wheat exports back in, I think May. I want to say May. Yes, in May, India also banned wheat exports from the country because of the very same reasons. Because the wheat exports from Ukraine, from Russia stopped. The wheat demand from India, which is actually the biggest producer of wheat, but is not a traditional exporter of wheat, because India's local demand has been huge, and India has not been able to export in the regular time, like regular periods. But because the demands were so skewed, because there was no supply from the traditional regions of Ukraine and Russia, Indian wheat was really the demand was high. Exporters, again, like you said, for edible oil, exporters were starting to get really good price for Indian wheat. And we saw this movement of wheat outside the country, which led to a price increase in the local markets. And India, of course, being a huge country, it stockpiles wheat. It has wheat in its food program that it gives to the poor people, and all things like that. India could not afford that also, so this was more of a proactive step from what I saw, what Indian government did. A huge conversation after that was in the WTO meeting that happened, the ministerial meeting. countries, especially Western countries, I would say, blaming India about, exaggerating this problem of food inflation in the world by banning wheat exports. But of course, India just came out and said that we have to look after our own people because prices are rising here, and it's only about meeting domestic needs. And there's nothing, uh, like you said, intentional about, trying to not give wheat or food to other countries. But there is a caveat in Indian wheat export. India said it would ban the exports, but it also did not completely ban them. Like the Indian exports, government to government exports, were still on. So came out later, a day or two after it's talked about the ban. It said the government to government deals would go through. Bangladesh is big Indian wheat importer, and India assured all the neighboring countries, which is the first line of neighbors for India, all the neighboring countries, that you would all get wheat. I think India was also in talks with Egypt. If I'm not getting the country wrong, in Middle East, I think it was also in talks with the government to government talks with Indonesia about wheat exports and things like that. So wheat, for the time being, I think it's fine. Uh, in India, I'll just shift a little bit conversation to a newer to the next food grain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, in South Asia, there is monsoon season, which is the main crop growing season. It'll end in October. The harvesting begins in October, and one of the major crops of the season is rice. Uh, and there are now discussions about Indian rice production. India is, in fact, I think the second biggest producer, but the biggest exporter of rice in the world. So rice exports out of India, if that's impacted in some way, that would really be a blow to the food grain prices or rice prices internationally, globally. What happened this time in India is, as rice is completely dependent on monsoon, on the rainy season, the monsoon this time was not really uh, like, I don't know, normal, regular. In the first month, June, it started very late, essentially. So the rice sowing that happened very late. Plus, there are certain major rice producing states in India, like West Bengal, like Uttar Pradesh. They have received lesser rainfall than they did in the previous seasons. So there is this apprehension in India that there will be about 8 to 10% shortfall of rice production this season. If that ends up happening, I think we'll see a more concrete number in a month or two. But I think that could prompt the Indian government again to ban or to restrict rice exports in one way or the other. Maybe higher duties on rice exports, or completely banning it for the private exporters, which could really be, it could impact negatively all the prices in the international market. From what I have as the list, Bangladesh, China, Nepal, and Benin are the biggest importers of Indian rice, volume wise. That is volume wise. India also exports a lot of rice to West Asian countries. So it's then it won't be only a regional problem. Then it could, become into something more. Uh, just talking about this rice and apprehensions about rice, I when I was reading about this, I noticed that Thailand, I think, is one of a major producer of rice too, right?
Yeah,
We
Thailand
have,
and Vietnam also produce a lot of rice too.
yeah,
And recently Thailand and Vietnam are talking about coordinating to better set rice prices. So like
mm,
they can kind of not, I don't want to like control the market in a negative way, but it kind of behooves countries to cooperate so they're not trying to undercut each other in a race to the bottom. And I think what you touch on, Akdan, is a really interesting point. Like, we talk about these monsoons and climate, the, the rainwater from this is a big deal for
yeah.
planting and stuff. Do you think in the future, especially in South Asia, there's going to be problems with the planting season? Larger storms, worse storms, due to climate change. I know that's a big deal in Southeast Asia when we look at this, because then that's actually going to drive more export controls. Because if you have storms that are messing up your rice paddies, you then have less rice. And this is not a global market thing. This is not caused by global, war in Ukraine
Hmm.
or export issues in other countries. This is just domestic stuff that's caused by climate change. And I know in Southeast Asia and Oceania is a little farther out of the realm, but that's what they're all concerned about is how's climate change going to affect their food security going forward. And if they're worried about their own food production, they're going to input more price and export controls, and it's going to cause a chain reaction because of the way countries are intertwined. Do you think India is going to run into these issues? I'm not too familiar with Indian and Bangladesh uh, environment, so I apologize.
Yeah,
But
no, no. Monsoons, of course, it is. Just to give you an example, how it's manifesting in different ways is the wheat ban was also a product of an intense heat wave in the peninsula this season. In the very peak summer months, the heat wave was so bad this year that it led to destruction of some of the wheat crops. That led to this tension of shortfall in the local market and also the price rise. So in the wheat export ban, heat wave was already a big concern. In countries like Afghanistan, which had droughts and things, which have been having frequent droughts and floods, we've seen a disruption in their patterns of food grain sowing and even harvesting. So that it is a widespread problem, yes. In terms of India particularly, how I see this as uh, some years, of course, there's normal rainfall, some years there's less than average, that's still fine. But the variability of monsoon, as in what regions receive what percentage of rainfall, that I think is starting to look very different. And the skewed picture, we can really see the skewed picture, because as I mentioned, the two states of West Bengal and Uttar Pradesh, they are big states where we have rice and other important, they are big agricultural states which have been dependent very much on the monsoons. And this year they did not, in fact, receive rainfall that they do usually. So we see, but some other states like Gujarat, Maharashtra are having floods in them. So we are seeing this different manifestations of different variability or and timings of monsoons. Sometimes it lags behind, sometimes it pushes and stays for longer. I see climate change, of course we don't have an exact pattern of how this would develop, but I see countries like India, and there are conversations about trying to optimize our sowing patterns, or trying to come up with solutions to protect or prevent against things like these. But yeah, climate change, I think, in the region would be big, especially because monsoons are such a big phenomenon on which all the economies of all these smaller countries depend, in South Asia particularly.
yeah, I mean, and it's kind of weird to sit there and when we look at things, trying to. I feel kind of weird. It's like we're trying to link, some of these things that don't seem like they really connect, but they really all impact these food exports. The ability to just grow food. If you can't grow food, you're not going to export any. You need
Mm.
to feed your own people first. And you mentioned that, like, you said India is looking into finding new agricultural techniques or ways to ensure that you mitigate the effects of climate change. But I know you can only do so much. Are there other things that India or Bangladesh or South Asia in general is trying to do to ensure that they don't have to enforce export controls? I know countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, they're looking for ways to mitigate climate change. They're looking for ways to prevent destruction of crops due to flooding, etc. Not just because of profits, but because they don't want to lose
Yeah.
food. Food insecurity is a big problem. Are there any other things that you think South Asia can do to prevent new export controls from being implemented? Yeah, I can't
I
talk.
think I think better food management, or food processing is one way to go for India. I have seen some conversations about India trying to set up more food parks and things like that, to just, and because you said, like you said, shelf life of many of these items is really low, very perishable items. So if we have something, a more efficient system of just transporting, just processing and exporting these goods, this could just help lower the wastage, I think, in food, because food production in India has been not a concern for the past 6 7 months. I would highlight wheat, rice, sugar. All the production has been like record high for India. Yes, we have some apprehensions this year, but for the past 6 7 years, we have been having record productions. I do not think they can lead to record exports or being utilized optimally. I think that's one of the areas where India can work. But other than that, it's monsoon. I think there will be change in patterns of sowing, in regions of sowing. Different crops will come up in different regions. That I think I can see, but that's like a little bit longer down the line. Uh, but yeah, those are some of the conversations that I think we will continue to have.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I know logistics are a big deal especially with the trade between South and Southeast Asia, and one of the biggest limiting factors in that, obviously, like you said, is the ships, is shipping. And how can your ports handle this increase in maritime traffic? Do you need to increase the size of ports? Do you need to look at exporting from new places so we don't have the food or these edible items, for lack of a better term, foodstuffs is a much better way to put it.
Mhm.
Foodstuffs, rotting before you can even get it to market. This has been the age old problem for farmers and logistics. With that, it's a problem. It's been a problem across the world for a long time. And yeah, I agree. For at least on the Southeast Asian side, they're looking obviously at increasing production so they
Mhm.
can both sell more abroad and have enough for domestic markets. Indonesia has something called the DMO, domestic market obligation, where they typically
Yeah.
require farmers or producers or whoever of any good that falls under this very broad umbrella. They make you have 15 to 25 to 35% of whatever you make has to be sold at the domestic market at a very, very reduced price. Um, and I think, going forward, if people are able to increase their harvest, increase their supply and production, then they won't be so upset about having to sell 25% at a reduced price, simply because they'll have more to export. So I think that's it. I think we kind of ran out of time, but lots to talk about with this wonderful export controls.
Oh
Do you want to take us home, Ekta?
yeah. Of course, we will continue talking about it. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in. And if you really want to learn more about what we do, how we do, follow us at Train.
Yeah, thank you guys.